The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
$1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. Are you wondering, are we going to have hyperinflation or crushing deflation? Is Europe going to inflate or deflate or just blow up? My next guest, Mish Shedlock, great blog, worldwide reputation. How you doing, Mish?
I'm doing fine. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, it's really great to have you on as a longtime fan of your blog. So why do you think that we're headed for deflation?
Well, before we can say where we're headed, we have to define the terms. If I define deflation as a decrease in money supply and credit with credit mark to market, I define inflation as an increase in money supply and credit with credit mark to market. So I don't think of things in terms of prices. So if someone wants to tell me, well, gasoline price is going up, and I'm saying, okay, yes, but that might be because of peak oil. We have other prices going up, mainly in the medical industries. Certainly, healthcare costs keep rising and rising and rising, and a lot of that has to do with poor government policy and poor government intervention everywhere. But if you look at what really matters, it's the amount of credit that's entering the system. We had a housing bust. Trillions of dollars worth of credit has been written off the books. Housing prices have crashed. You had someone call me up and say, "Oh, Mish, the price of butter just rose 50 cents a stick from," and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what's more important here? A home price losing $400,000 in value, or a stick of butter going up 50 cents? So if we look at things in terms of credit and credit expansion, when credit is expanding, jobs are being created, industries are hiring people. Well, we don't have credit expansion now. In fact, we've got complaints that banks aren't lending. Well, why aren't banks lending? Because they're afraid of losses. They're capital impaired. These are the kinds of things that you understand when you start analyzing everything from the point of view of credit, not from the point of view of, well, the Fed just printed, $1 trillion.
So then, as far as the adjusted monetary base, M0 tripling or quadrupling in the last 3-4 years, is that inflationary, or is it just an exercise in trying to make these banks look better than they are?
It depends on what happens to the money. The Fed has increased base money supply by $1.8 trillion since the start of the recession. The current economic theory, actually long-standing economic theory, has been that, well, banks will take this money and they'll lend it out, and then it'll get redeposited in banks and get lent out again and again and again. That supposedly that this base money was going to filter out into the economy 10 times over. Yet what we see happening is, of that 1.8 trillion that the Fed printed, 1.6 trillion of it is parked as excess reserves straight back at the Fed. In other words, banks aren't lending. They'd rather have 0.25% interest on excess reserves from the Fed rather than lend it out. Well, why is that? Because for two reasons. Banks are capital constrained. They're still hiding losses. Look at all the real estate that's on the books, balance sheets of these banks that's not marked to market. So they're capital constrained, and not enough credit-worthy borrowers are seeking money. What business wants to expand in this environment when home sales are still collapsing, when home prices are still falling, when unemployment rate is at a claimed 8.4%, say 8.6%, when really, if you look behind the scenes and you start counting all the people that want a job and don't have a job, It's really more like 17%. So, all of these are reasons why the businesses aren't expanding. And all of these are reasons why Bernanke's fail. Everyone thought, Bernanke would have an easy time defeating deflation. He said all the things that he would do. He actually went out there and did all these things. He still hasn't succeeded in getting banks to lend. They're capital impaired and no businesses want to borrow. That's really what this is all about. And when he's pumping all this money supply, he's hoping that banks will take this and lend it. But as I said, economic theory is wrong. It doesn't happen that way. Banks don't lend money just because the Fed is making it available. It is something that I've said for a long time. Banks lend money when they've got credit-worthy borrowers. They don't see it. So this is why Bernanke's been stymied. This is why all of the hyperinflationists have been wrong. There's one more way of looking at it too. It's my gosh, they say base money is tripled or whatever, it's quadrupled, whatever it's done here, in the last 4 years or something. Certainly since the recession, it's gone up by 1.8 trillion. My gosh, look at this. But in terms of the overall credit market, total credit market in the United States is $55 trillion. So what does an additional 1.8 trillion mean when 1.6 trillion of it is sitting there at excess reserves not lent out? Not much. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of Bernanke's policies. I'm not. They're very distortionary. He's reignited a boom in investments. He's certainly bailed out the financial industry. The stock market is up. People are speculating again in stocks. They're speculating in commodity futures. Oil prices are rising. Plus we've got other central banks doing the same thing. Money supply and credit is expanding in China at a phenomenal rate. So someone looking for where inflation is taking hold, it's in China, not the United States. But all of these, factors are commingling, and we have various competitive currency debasement across the ECB, who's lending money at really cheap rates for 3 years for European banks. Bernanke's making all the money available that anyone wants. No one's doing it. China, when China says lend, the banks over there do lend. That money is filtering in. So the one thing you would expect to see happen in this kind of competitive currency debasement scheme is for the price of gold to rise. So I'm a deflationist that happens to like gold, and I've been on the right side of that. The price of gold has gone up from $250 to all the way to $1,900. Meanwhile, in the last 10 years, the stock market's gone nowhere.
Yeah, and that's interesting. A deflationist who likes gold, and I guess silver along with that too, huh?
Well, silver's an industrial commodity. I believe gold is money. I think when we see this slowdown, there's a regime change coming next year in China. And they're going to be focused less on building homes, less on infrastructure, less on all these railroads, bridges, airports, less on all kinds of things that are going to reduce the need for industrial commodities like copper, like silver, lead, all of these other things. So gold's main role here is as a currency. So we're seeing it be much more stable and a much more lasting duration uptrend than the wild swings we've seen with both copper and silver.
And platinum and the other noble metals as well. So question here, the U.S. government deficit, all right, it's at somewhere $1.5 trillion. 42.3 cents of every federal dollar that's spent is quote unquote borrowed. Much of that is being printed up at the Fed, is it not?
Absolutely.
Is that inflationary?
It is. I mean, you have to look at the overall grand scheme of things. All of these things in isolation are inflationary. I would agree with you that that's inflationary. I would agree with you that base money supply going up is inflationary. It's just simply being counteracted right now by forces of deflation that are stronger. The inflationists would say, well, it's just a matter of time here before it turns into hyperinflation. Well, hyperinflation is a political event. It's a complete loss of faith in currency. You hear these reports all the time. Well, this is Zimbabwe. This is Argentina. Well, no, it's not. In Argentina, the government made a peg that it could not contain to the U.S. dollar. And trying to maintain that peg to the U.S. dollar, people lost faith in the currency. In Zimbabwe, what we saw was a government took over, seized all property rights, drove out, it was white flight, drove out all the white landowners. They left Zimbabwe. They took their money with them. They took their property with them. They took their IP with them. And the entire country was left with a hollow shell. Again, a political event. Weimar Germany, that people refer to, was also a political event. Following World War I, the League of Nations instituted all of these mandates that Germany bail out, pay back all the debt, all the problems that it caused during World War I. It had no way to do that. It had no industrial capacity. It was wiped out. So they resorted to the printing presses. And to enforce those terms on Germany, France actually invaded Germany. So once again, we had a series of political events that led to printing. I don't see that happening in the United States. In fact, if anything, the Fed would go way out of their way, as a defender of banks, trying to bail out banks at the expense of taxpayers, that would stop that kind of action. So if you look at it in terms of the politics, the U.S. has the most stable, at least for now, credit markets in the entire world. And as long as that holds true, there's going to be a lot of faith in the U.S. dollar.
So you don't foresee the eventuality of the U.S. dollar losing its status as the reserve currency of the world?
I think the United States would love to lose the world's reserve status. That's one of these things that's quite funny. I hear it all the time. Oh my gosh, what if China just stops buying U.S. treasuries? Well, as a function of math, the U.S. runs a trade deficit, okay? U.S. runs a trade deficit almost with everyone, but it runs a big deficit with China. So as a function of that trade deficit, China takes in these dollars. So what do they do with those dollars? Well, China takes those dollars and prints yuan. Why does China do that? It wants to hold down. It wants to suppress the value of the yuan so that it can increase exports. But as a sheer function of math, in doing that, China accumulates all of these U.S. dollar foreign reserves. The United States, bear in mind, both Obama and Tim Geithner, Secretary of Treasury, and Ben Bernanke at the Fed are all pressuring China to float its currency, to revalue it up. Why do they want China to do that? So, well, everyone wants to do the same thing so we can increase exports. Well, so all of these people have it ass backwards when they say, oh my God, China's going to stop buying treasuries. Well, if China stopped buying treasuries, the value of the yuan, China wouldn't be printing yuan to swap for dollars. The value of the yuan would soar. Bernanke would get what he wants. Obama would get what he wants. Mitt Romney and everyone else would get what they want. So people have this whole concept ass backwards. The reserve currency forces the U.S. into this situation that it's in, where Mitt Romney is proposing a trade war. I think the solution is to go back to a gold standard, which would make everything self-correcting between nations. If the United States is printing too much money, spending more than it has, well, to stop the flight of gold from leaving the United States, the U.S. would have to jack up interest rates, keeping the money and the currency here. It's a self-balancing situation. Once Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard, we had this massive increase in the amount of credit. It's one of the things and Greenspan stepped on the gas. It fueled the housing bubble. Now we're on the back side of that. credit is imploding, and all these guys are trying to prevent that from happening, when the problem was the expansion of credit got untenable after Nixon took the United States off the gold standard.
Yeah, well, you raise a great point about the discipline of a gold standard, but that would really require major reprioritizing of domestic spending, of what the government does, what it can afford to do, because we couldn't run these humongous budget deficits at the federal level if there was a discipline, an external discipline imposed by a gold standard, could we?
Bingo. That's exactly correct.
Which makes it really unlikely that this is going to occur until we're absolutely forced to do it, right?
Well, this is what the Ron Paul revolution is all about. I mean, he's against all the wars. All the warmongers are not against the wars. So, if you're in favor of all this deficit spending for wars, if you're in favor of the United States having troops in literally 140 countries around the world, one of the things that enables this is the fractional reserve banking system that we have that's no longer has any ties whatsoever to gold. So yes, that's what this big fight is all about. And in spite of the fact that Republicans are saying that they're fiscally conservative, well, they're not. I mean, look at the budget deficits when Bush was in control, and the Republicans had control not only of the presidency, but of both houses and Congress. The budget deficits still blew out of the water. There's only one candidate out there. I don't know if you want to get into politics or not, but Ron Paul is running, on a platform that would said, hey, we need to stop the Fed. We need to end the Fed. We need to end fractional reserve lending. We need to go back to a sound currency. I support all of those things. That does not mean I support everything that Ron Paul said.
Exactly. I'm with you 100% on that, Mish, and he's the only guy talking about it. So to some extent, he's elevated the debate because his message has gotten out. On the other hand, the media out there and the other candidates have totally marginalized him. But I just saw that Gingrich is calling for a gold conference about reimposing a gold-backed currency, whether it's political mumbo-jumbo, jiu-jitsu or whatever, I don't know, but it tells me something about Paul has resonated. He's looking to pick up those Paul voters. And, it's just so amazing. The other thing that a gold standard would do was stop all the unions dead in their tracks. The union thuggery, the union exploitation, and the buying of government by the unions and the banks would be at an end, because the functions that the government could realistically undertake and assign to themselves would shrink by 80% overnight.
But you still have politicians at the local level, and this came in with Kennedy, who by mandate actually came out and said, public unions are now going to be under collective bargaining unions rights, and that opened an entire gamut of problems. So to get around that, I don't think a gold standard is going to help, but we need new legislation. We need legislation to scrap the Davis-Bacon Act. We need legislation to end collective bargaining of public unions. We need national right to work laws that Rand Paul has been working on. We need all of those things. We need somehow to rein in these pension promises that have been made. What do we do about them? I think we're going to have to renege on some of them. I think we're going to have to renege on some of the social Medicare expenditures that we've agreed to. So a whole bunch of things need to be reworked. Europe is going through this, right now. I think Japan is actually going to be next. Japan is in such an untenable state here that were interest rates to rise to a mere 3% in Japan, it would literally consume 100% of their revenues.
Wow.
Wow, imagine being in that state. And that's what happens when you have debt to GDP ratio that Japan has. It's heading up, it's projected to be 230% of GDP. The U.S. right now is, I don't know, you get various numbers, but let's call it 100% and rising. So, maybe we've got a few years left. It depends on how Europe's going through now, and Japan is going to be going through, what the U.S. is going to be hit with. And so we'd better be following what's going on over there, because the U.S. is certainly not immune to this same kind of action. And that's the one point that I would agree with the inflationists on.
All right. Hey, well, Mish, it's really been great having you on here. If we want to find you on the internet, where do we go?
I've got a blog. This is a lengthy blog, globaleconomicanalysis.blogspot.com. That is a mouthful. The easy way to find me is do a Google search for Mish, M-I-S-H. It's simply the first two characters of my first and last names, Mish Shedlock. So do a Google search for Mish, M-I-S-H, take you straight to my blog. I talk about Europe, the United States, interest rates, gold, silver, peak oil, and a whole gamut of economic topics every day of the week, 4 times a day typically.
Hey, well, one of my favorite things just as is your analysis of the rape of these public employee unions and the impossibility of ever honoring those promises. You really boldface it, and you've done some great work on it over the past couple of years, and hope you stick with it and turn the temperature up.
Sure will, and I look forward to being back on the show.
All right, you'll be back soon.